it's Kisha here with Defending the Early Years podcast. We'll be focusing on amplifying the voices of early childhood educators, advocates, and all of those who love children. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Defending the Early Years podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to be talking to Jane Elgin. Jane is a public school teacher in Indianapolis, Indiana. And I was pulled to Jane's work through some of her amazing photography of older early childhood children playing in the classroom. She's working with children who are 8, 9, and 10. And I'm just really excited to dig into what it looks like for older early childhood children to have play in their classroom. Welcome, Jane.
Hi, thanks so much for having me, Kisha. I'm so excited to be here. I love the Facebook page. I'm always so inspired to see your childcare and everybody else's childcares. And I'm just so honored that you asked me to be on here.
You know, I'm always inspired by your photos and your comments and your work, because so often I hear teachers expressing the frustration of not being able to allow time for play. Sometimes they're fighting for like the bare minimums, like recess, even play outside of the classroom. So to come upon someone who has made it work, I think will be inspiring for many. I can't wait to hear more about that work and how you've made it happen. So tell us a little bit about your work with children, and how you're doing this.
Okay. Well, my journey to teaching third grade started with very, very little children many, many years ago. When I studied child development at Purdue, I really became just fascinated with play and looking at childhood as a really important developmental stage that deserves as much respect as we have to give it. And everything around me was showing me that children were not respected for their developmental level, and they were constantly being put in inappropriate situations. So I became really passionate about unstructured, open-ended play as a form of validating childhood. So it was very easy to do when I was a Head Start teacher, because that's, one of the core principles of Head Start is that the children are learning through play experiences. So that really helped me hone play and justifying play and being able to explain the developmental benefits of play those years. And, just the twists and turns of my life, I've got to connect with really amazing educators along the way who further supported me developing a perspective of play is the way to teach children. And I'm so lucky that I had those influences in my life when I was a really young teacher that really carved out my teaching path for me. I don't think if I had those experiences with those particular professionals, maybe I would have ended up being a very, very different teacher. So I'm so grateful that those people taught me about play.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I love so much about this advocacy piece, where we're just together in a community of practice sharing these things, because actually seeing it happen, it already says, look, this can be done. Here's what it looks like. And then we could go backwards and figure out, all right, how did we get there? How did we get there? So
absolutely.
I am excited to hear and not surprised to hear that your background is in the early childhood sector, like working with the very young children, because that's something else that I notice is that teachers who have that as their foundation do have an easier time incorporating those developmentally appropriate play practices in their classrooms.
Oh, absolutely. So I am very proud that my degree is in early childhood education, and my license is only through grade 3. I am a K3. I think my license is P3 in Indiana. I always joke that once you have your grown-up teeth, I just can't teach you anymore. I really like the littles. And I'm so proud when I get to share with other public school teachers that one of my favorite age groups to work with is the twos. I loved being a twos teacher. I loved being a toddlers teacher. And I can't help but bring that perspective that early childhood has, with a hyper focus on developmentally appropriate practice that changes the way that my classroom operates and the curriculum that I provide to children. How I communicate with families is very different than sometimes I think a lot of public school teachers view families, because in the early childhood tradition, families are the integral piece to care. And the child, through a family focused lens, definitely influences how I communicate with families and how I partner with the families in my classroom. So yeah, my background, I've worked with very, very little children for a long, long time. And I returned to public school teaching after I worked at our local child care resource and referral agency. Indiana had a pilot program for our quality rating system, and I was really lucky to be a part of the pilot as an early childhood mentor. So I did that for 8 years, where I provided professional development, on-site consultation with amazing programs throughout Southern Indiana. And I really, really enjoyed that job a lot. And when my kids got a little bit bigger, it became a priority of mine to have my schedule on the same schedule as my children. So I decided to take a big professional risk and return to the classroom in a public school setting. And the classroom that I returned to was a K-5 setting. It was a tier 3, which means very restrictive. The children are not allowed to participate in the general education curriculum. And it was for children whose emotional and behavioral needs were so severe that they could no longer be included in their classroom. And it was my job to have these children come to me, for me to identify what their behavioral needs were, what their behavior was expressing and communicating, because we all know that behavior communicates. And then to come up with a plan of how these children could successfully be returned to the general education classroom. And my background in early childhood told me that these children desperately needed to play. They either didn't know how to play, they, for whatever reasons, didn't have those early childhood experiences that are so fundamental, or they came to me just desperately needing a different format than what the public school traditional setting was providing for them. So, I really found a new voice for advocating for children, because they would come to my classroom and suddenly the behaviors weren't as severe.
Yes. So
Um,
that was the proof in the pudding. Like you could
it,
actually show that.
yes, and I had the data to back it up, that when children were allowed to move, and children were allowed to sing, and children were allowed to throw beanbags at targets, and children were allowed to play cooperatively and have building blocks and have cooperative play projects and all of these different things available to them, well, then suddenly they could focus and behave. It was a way it was a way for me to really demonstrate that curriculum does not need to be isolated instruction, that I could cross curriculum easily and make play experiences founded on whatever literacy concept I was supposed to be teaching, or play concepts that were connected to the math standards that we were supposed to be teaching. Because, as a public school teacher, I was still held very strictly to the standards that we were expected to be teaching. That's a very high pressure point for a public school, is alignment with those standards and being able to justify that you're teaching those standards. So I just did it like I had always done it in Head Start classrooms and in various programs where, I demonstrated that I was teaching those standards. I was just doing it through play. So when when administrators would walk in the room and they'd see that we had taken all of the parachutes and draped them over the tables and we were playing in caves and things like that, they kind of come in and be like, "What's going on in here?" And I would be able to tell them, well, we're actually really enjoying some reading time together. We're just doing it in a real, it's a lot more fun to do it this way. And um, it was
So
just such a
during
powerful way for me to advocate.
Mhm. And during that time, you were in a school that was specific to children with developmental struggles, or was that just your classroom within a school that had neurotypical children?
That's exactly what it was. So our district identified that we had children who clearly had additional needs that needed met, but that they did not qualify for an individual education plan. They did not have an identified special need to qualify for special education services. So my district was quite progressive in saying, well, let's see what we can do to try and get these kids what they need. So we were housed in my neighborhood school. Actually, it was kind of
Okay.
perfect. It was just a
Yeah.
few houses away, but we took children from all across the district.
Okay. Wow.
Um,
That's wonderful. And what the reason why I asked that is because um I wanted to know that your work was being seen by everyone, right? That you're in a space where the classroom next door could see that young children can play and still learn, and that young children who may struggle in the traditional classroom box, it's not the child that's broken, it is the system that is broken. So being able to see you at work, and not kind of shuffling you guys off somewhere else,
yes,
away from everyone else, to me is such valuable advocacy in itself. Did you find that your work was trickling into other areas of the building? Did your work change the way that teachers across the board worked with young children?
I would like to say yes to that. I know I sound a little egotistical when I say yes, of course, but um, I really think that I did see big changes in the schools that I was in. One interesting thing about that position is it also put me in touch with administrators and counselors from across the district as well. You know, I had to meet with them regularly to share the data on how those students were because they were still enrolled in their previous school. They were just temporarily housed in my classroom. And it was great that I got to talk to so many principals, assistant principals, school counselors, school psychologists, and advocate for children from a top down level. So that was really powerful piece of my teaching. In my actual school, at first it was met with kind of animosity. You know, we would walk down the hallway and we would just go down the hallway. I didn't, have bubbles and feathers and whatever all those things are that children are required to do.
Mhm.
I would, it was just so crazy. And, here we were, we would just go down to the gym. And, before we left the classroom, I would just say to the children very genuinely, I would say, it's one way we can show respect by staying quiet in the hallway so that we're not interrupting everybody. And then we just walk out the door, like,
Exactly. Just that respect and trust that the children can hear you and understand you. And because you have that relationship with you, they have that relationship with you, they'll listen to that. They get it. And I feel
yeah.
like cases when we say, put a bubble in your mouth, or, all those crazy things that we say to them, that's, to me, slightly disrespectful.
Oh, I think it's so disrespectful. We would never,
Yeah.
never tell an adult that they
Yes.
have to be silent, that they cannot even control where their hands are. The one that's the most offensive to me is where they're expected to have, like, I think it's called duck feathers or something, where they put their hands behind their back to walk
Mm,
down the hallway. And oh my gosh,
yeah. I haven't heard of
I
that one.
can't even I can't even look at it. Like, it's
Yeah.
so hurtful to think that they're not even given autonomy on how they can walk with their bodies. And
Mhm.
anyone who knows child development knows that little children have to have their arms moving to move well. They have a wide base of support. I, that's all I'm going to say about that.
Yeah. Yes.
Um, but I think at first people were kind of like, well, who does she think she is that she
Mhm.
can take these kids outside on a whim and she can walk them down the hallway without these, you know, straight, super lines and having one foot in the green and one foot in the red. And, all these just completely arbitrary expectations when it was just so unnecessary. So suddenly I would see teachers not necessarily having those. And remarkably, chaos did not ensue. And, we just got where we needed to be. And then after about, I would say maybe 6 months, as the staff got to know me better, um, they would actually come to me and say, how did you do that? How did you do that art project? How do you have a trampoline in your classroom? How do you allow these things to happen? And so I just started really telling them, I just do it. And, I make sure that the children understand that some of the things could potentially be dangerous. So I expect them to, be safe doing it. And I don't want to have to say no to you. But if you're showing me that you're going to use these things incorrectly, then I'm going to have to tell you no. It's not something I want to do.
Mhm.
So I go over some very basic safety rules, and those are pretty much the only rules that they need. Um, so, I would tell a lot of teachers those things. They would come in, and the children especially loved the throwing alley that I had, where I had targets taped on the wall, and the kids were allowed to go and throw bean bags as hard as they wanted against these targets.
I love that.
And,
The
I'm
throwing alley. I love that.
yeah, it's always my favorite part of the classroom. And, you can't hand a kid a bean bag and say, put it on your shoulder, put it on your head, and like all the songs that go with that. I mean, what fun is that?
Mhm.
It's really fun to throw a bean bag, and it's really fun to throw a bean bag really hard.
Yeah.
So, it's not fun to underhand toss a bean bag. So, when you give children those outlets, then they don't seek those opportunities in inappropriate ways. So a child who's throwing wants to throw, we'll give them the right thing to throw.
And give
Um,
them the space to do it safely. And
yes.
that works across the board from, I mean, from as young as toddlers all the way up. They truly do understand when we trust and have that relationship and communication with them, how to do these things safely. What I love is
Yeah.
that
And
up an environment that takes into account what actual real live children need to do instead
I
of
try,
pushing against it.
yeah, I try really, really hard to also treat them as a member of a community. A
Mhm.
school is a tiny little community. So, when I say to them, hey, let's remember it's distracting if we're too loud in the hallway. Let's please try and stay quiet when we're there. There's a big difference between that and, having this absolute strict rule of silence in the hallway. When you and I would walk down the mall together, we would walk next to each other. We don't necessarily have to be in single file line. So I like my rules to reflect sort of the community rules that are unspoken in our community, that we can show respect to each other. We should be showing respect to each other, and there's ways you can do that. And then other than that, within those parameters, you're really free to be you. Um, so I loved that job. I really, really loved that job. What was great about that classroom is it very accurately pinpointed children who had previously not been identified with a special need, who desperately needed special education services. So we had a lot of data to support and advocate for children to get the education that they had the right to. And about a third of the kids who came in my program did have a special need that had previously been unidentified, either emotional behavioral disorder or other health impairment, even a 504 plan with an ADHD plan, something to get these children what they needed and have protections put in place so that they had that right protected. So I was very happy that we could advocate in that way. About a third of the kids came in the classroom and very quickly wanted to return to their general education classroom, when sometimes they would see children who really did have explosive behavior. It was kind of shocking to them. And they would want to return to their classroom, kind of like an, okay, I get it. I've been so bad. I need to stop. And I need to, comply a little bit more with what the teacher's asking me to do. And then about a third of the kids would come through the program, and we would develop education plans for them. We would then communicate with the homeschool and say, if this child just had more opportunities to move, if this
Mhm.
child was given more opportunities to touch. These kids were starved for things that they were allowed to touch, and they would find ways to touch things in very inappropriate ways in their previous school setting. So we would come up and draft plans and say, here's some ideas that would work really easily in your classroom. And then those children would return to their classroom with those protections in place and ideas in place. And, sometimes that was met with a wide open welcome door. And other times it was met with, some animosity, but I can't control how people receive the message. But it was my job to make sure that the message was really loud and clear what these children showed that they needed, and that I had plans that were achievable to help the child have what they needed.
And that's too what I love about this, that that spillover back into the typical classroom, because I'm going to guarantee right now that it's not only just the child that was pulled out into your program that needs these things. I'm willing to bet that every last child in that classroom could do for some more movement and some more touch and some more humanness within the setting of their classroom. So bravo for you, to running this pilot and really proving it and really showing how it can look. What are you doing now? Because I know that you said that's where you worked, and you've moved
Yes.
um, to a different place. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing now and what that's looking like.
Yes. Well, I would still be in that classroom if I could have. The district, there was a long waiting list to get into my classroom. And so we knew we were not meeting all the children's needs. So they had to change the program pretty significantly. And it was moved away from the school that I was housed at. And my principal at that school, who I just adored, invited me to stay on faculty at that school. She said, I have a first grade position open. I really would like you to stay as a Harper teacher. Would you consider switching to first grade? And I thought, I can still advocate for early childhood here. so, so I did. I took the position in first grade, and I found that, boy, the pressures of first grade, it's like things that used to be taught in third grade are now taught in first grade. And it was just heartbreaking to see these little children, little 6-year-old children, crying over standardized testing that they were required to take. And it was just shocking to me. So I thought, okay, that's it. We are doing it differently. And fortunately, I had a principal who saw what I already could do, and she saw how positively the families loved the classroom. So she kind of just let me run with it. So I thought, okay, let's really do this properly. So I incorporated all kinds of different play stations and learning stations. And we dedicated so much time to unstructured play. My classroom that I had, we had our own private, we called it the backyard, this fenced in area that was immediately off my classroom. So we played outside so much, in unstructured, self grouped ways. And it was such a great creative challenge for me to see how can I teach the children these standards that I'm required to show improvement on, and still let them be little 6-year-old children. So it was just so much fun to cross curricular content like that, where we would have, I'm thinking of one project we did where the kids were fascinated with this eagle cam. It was in Washington, D.C., these
Yeah.
two eagles that we absolutely loved it. So we would check in regularly on the eagle cam. So I brought in all kinds of different props and things to support the play. I was wondering if they would start to play imaginatively, dramatically Eagle Camp. And they, of course, they did. So, I brought in all these different materials that they could build nests and be the mommy eagle and fly away and hunt and do all these different things. And then I would take that and move it down to a smaller scale where they had to design and build using, sticks and feathers and mud and all kinds of stuff, where they would have to build smaller scale eagle things. And when I was doing that, I was integrating writing and reading and math and science standards into that. So, it would be a very easy jump from designing it and touching it with your hands. And then I would say, okay, now so that the next person might want to build this exact same one, let's write down the process. What did you do? This is called a numbered list. Let me teach you how it works. And, I would teach the standards through that way.
Yeah, and it's
And
relevant. It's attached to something that they have experienced, something that they have played with, something that they have collectively agreed that they're interested in. And it's not separated from real life. And I think there's too much separation from real life in our education system.
oh my gosh, it's such a disconnect. And,
Mhm.
I never had pushback when I would say, okay, now let's write this down in case somebody else would like to know how you did this. Putting them in the seat of teacher
Yes.
and respecting their achievement and letting them see that you can document and share your knowledge. And there's a very real way of doing that. Writing and reading have very specific rules, especially in English. English is just a beast to learn how to read. We have so many spelling patterns, and it's very, very difficult to learn how to read and write English. So, it's important that they learn those skills. And I want literate children to come out of my classroom. So I just would continue to connect it with things that they were interested in. One year I had a classroom. The fairy tales are a standard in Indiana in first grade. And, everybody likes the cutesy woo stuff. And I thought, there's so much more in this. Let's just study the castle.
Mhm.
And I had a classroom, they were absolutely obsessed with castles and architecture. And, I said, well, the classroom, we could make it into a castle. What do you think we could do? And instead of me doing that, and me making it this Pinterest looking castle, I just
Yes.
gave the kids the paper and said, here you go. let's turn it into a castle. And our door had it's called a portcullis. It's those little spiky things that come down. And the kids designed it and hung it all up, and they had a sign outside the classroom that said, watch your head on the portcullis. Um, it was genuinely fantastic. So the great thing about it is that I never have the same year twice. And I think a lot of public school teachers kind of crave that spontaneity and novelty. It's very easy to become overly scripted and, gosh, I've taught this standard so many times, I'm just going to teach it again. Where when you base the classroom on child interest and project work, and you never have the same classroom twice.
Exactly.
Um, and it's so much fun to teach that way. And so I just started really playing with it. And project work was always something that was important to me anyways, but I saw very quickly that you can teach every single state standard that will be tested through project and child interest. um,
What
and
I
that's
like
that's how
said, what I like about what you said about the castle, and not something where you came in on the weekend and you changed the entire space into this castle that the children can then walk into and kind of, I guess, play around with. The difference between that and actually allowing that idea and thought and creativity to happen amongst the children, giving them that space to dialogue and have a collaboration and think of ideas and draw back from the reading that they've had and the experiences that they had through play to create this space. The difference in the ownership and that process of that work is so rich that I just want to thank you for not robbing them of that and hijacking that process. I think too often we in the system, we are so rushed to get to the end product that we forget about that process is still important, even in the children who are in first grade, second grade, third grade. And if you ask me, forever, the process, that
yes.
rich process is so important.
Yeah, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that you reminded me of that particular phrasing. I think I was beating around the bush to get to. Yeah, so I really believe that the classroom is the children's space. And a lot of time, I'm just going to say it, my classroom is plain old ugly because it's covered in things that are valuable to the children in the space. And, a lot of times the classroom looks a little bit ransacked because those things are valuable to the children in the space. I start the year with really nothing on my bulletin boards. I want it to be child owned. How do they want their classroom to look? And they were so proud of that jankety looking portcullis outside the classroom door. And they were so proud of everything that they built in the classroom. And to them, it was not construction paper and tinfoil. It was a castle portcullis.
Mhm.
And
They couldn't wait to get to school every day to their castle each day. And that's the
yes,
thing, excitement and that zeal for learning, right? And being together in this community of practice, really. Well,
yes, yes. And
Jane,
the process, it took us many trials and errors to get that how they wanted it.
mhm. And
Um,
learning along the way. Jane, I need you to tell everyone how they can get in contact with you because I mean, I am eager to continue this talk with you offline because I am so interested in discussing what this looks like, how everyone can do this. So tell us how we can get in contact with you if we have more questions, if anyone needs more support about how to make this happen in their public school system, how to go to their principal and talk about some of this. Can you please
sure.
how we can contact you?
I would love for people to email me. It's very simple. It's Jane, Jane, .elgin, ELGIN @gmail.com. That's my private email. I check it all the time. And I really love to connect with other educators. I love when people from true early childhood programs like 0 through 5 contact me because I feel like it reconnects me with my roots. And then I love, love, love to talk to public school teachers who I've now been a professional long enough. I get to be that teacher that I desperately needed when I was a brand new teacher. And I was so fortunate to have those positive influences in my career that now I get to be that older teacher that says, well, you could do it this way.
Mhm.
I'm just so excited that I get to sort of repay um, the early childhood world in those ways.
I love the way you put that. And thank you so much for that work that you're doing, both with children and with adults. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank
Oh my
you.
gosh.
I
Thank
really
you for
with you more
thank
about
you
this.
for the Facebook page and just all the wonderful things that you do. It inspires me more than you would ever know.
Oh my goodness, you're welcome. And thank you for participating in that community. All
Thank
right, everyone.
you.
So much for listening to the DEY podcast, where our mission is to work for a just, equitable, and quality early childhood education for every young child by informing educators, administrators, and parents about how children develop and learn best, and advocating for the active, playful, experiential approaches to learning informed by child development theory and evidence-based research. Bye bye, everybody. And that was another episode of the Defending the Early Years podcast. Defending the Early Years works to support the rights and needs of young children nationally. Learn more at DEY.org. Pay us a visit, sign up for our newsletter, or connect with us on social media. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.